So you're really the diaspora that you're looking at. And that diaspora is a key driver, in my opinion, for the future success of Africa anyway. Those fintechs are a good example, but there's tons of people who in other walks of life, they've gone to college in the UK, they're in Germany, they're in Holland, and they're coming home in their Joburgs, but what they're doing is bringing knowledge, know-how, experiences, different things, and then applying it to the continent with their family, friends, cousins, brothers, sisters. So I think diaspora is going to play a huge role in the development of Africa. And if you look at China, that's exactly what happened as well.
So it's a model that actually works.
Yeah, there's a whole write-up. I've read up on it from how they did it in China. And that actually theirs was deliberate.
And why are African governments sleeping on this?
Because they're not sleepers, we're sleeping on quite a few things.
How you doing?
Hey, Kojo, how's it?
Very well, thanks.
How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the Angle podcast, and thanks for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
You are an investor, and what drew you into venture capital?
Well, actually, it was to be honest, it was kind of like by default. I was an entrepreneur
Okay.
before, and like an entrepreneur, tried many different businesses. And then we had a business that was quite successful, and we exited that business. And when we exited that business, I set up like a family office and started investing in different new tech opportunities that came to me.
Oh, nice. And
Organic, but sort of calculated strategy.
And this was in West Africa.
Yeah, I was actually based in London, so I would say globally, but a lot of what we invest in, but Africa focused, yeah.
nice.
And now I live back in Africa, but when I started, I was living in the UK.
Cool. And before you went into investment, you were an entrepreneur yourself.
I'm still an entrepreneur as well.
Nice. And what kind of businesses did you build before you got
We had
into
to
this?
like, as I said, like many entrepreneurs, we invested in different. I was living in Nigeria at the time, so had an oil trading business. Then after that, sports marketing business. But the most significant business we had was today runs and operates the ports of Ghana. It's an infrastructure business. Cool. But then we varied, and some were great success, some were terrible failures.
Yeah.
And you learn along the journey.
I suppose that's the journey of venture investment. Is lots of hits and misses, I guess.
Exactly. I think everyone knows all these great investors for their great successes, but they don't tell you about the other 20 failures that they had. Yeah.
Nice. And if somebody's looking to invest in Africa, what would be your go-to sectors to invest in?
I'm personally quite opportunistic, so I'm not sector specific, but if I was hitting the sectors that a lot of people are interested in, fintech is definitely the rage, and many people focus on the fintech because obviously the whole financial ecosystem in Africa has so much room for growth. I think health tech has a huge opportunity going forward with the advent of AI and everything. There's so much more that can be done. I would say education.
Okay.
I think that there's a massive opportunity. Some of these things have been touched on in the conference to date. Those would be three of the largest ones I would look. I think there's also going to be a lot done around surveillance, security. Those are some of the key ones that would spring to mind.
And your interest in tech, is that just because you see it as high growth opportunity, or is it, or do you have just sort of a natural interest in sort of?
Yeah, I think I also. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think I've just always been interested in innovation. Probably when I was younger, it wasn't called tech, but I'm always interested in what's coming next. So what's the newest thing? Where we think, somebody, always thinking ahead and looking into the future, not necessarily being a deep futurist, but always thinking. And as an entrepreneur, there's many businesses we tried upon with hindsight, we were just ahead of our time. So sometimes it's also about the timing. You might have a great idea. There was a lady yesterday who was working on AI 10 years ago, being at the end of her time. But she didn't have the resilience. She might have dropped out not knowing that she was on the right thing, but the rest of the world has to also catch up.
And how has it been for you investing in tech businesses in Africa? Have you seen some success?
Like many investors, we were just saying it's up and down. You hear some. We've invested in some that look like they could be great successes.
Yeah.
We've had some that are failures, but as an investor and entrepreneur, I'm naturally optimistic by nature. So even when you have the failures, you learn from them, correct yourself, and keep going.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger picture for the continent is there's so much room for growth, but there will be more and more success stories, and we are seeing some, and we've invested in some, and we think we're very excited about what we're seeing and the possibilities coming.
We've had a few in previous interviews in the last day or two. We've had essentially, I mean, I'm pushing my particular viewpoint in that Africa as a continent, so some sectors more than others. Just as from a market perspective, it just strikes me as like untapped for the most part in terms of one of the problems that you can solve relatively simply and easily. Is that something that you guys follow in your own ethos? You're just like,
yeah, that's right.
The opportunity here is just
Completely. So that's why I think it's just as you've seen. I think it's quite obvious, and I think that as I said, I grew up most half my life in the U.S. and Europe, so I have a kind of very clear view of a global viewpoints, and I think that there's so much just hasn't been done here, firstly, and then second, of course, I'm sure you've heard the phrase, is this leapfrog opportunity, because we're not hampered by some of the antiquated infrastructures that others have, you know?
But based off of that, like, what would be your viewpoint as to why there isn't more investment on the continent? Is it?
Well, I think there's a part of the change that needs to happen is in the global financial architecture anyway. In Africa, unfortunately, has always been at the bottom of that pyramid for many historic reasons. That's part of the change that's needed, whether that change comes through crypto or new financial currencies or a new world financial architecture. It's going to have to happen because half of the issues of Africa just don't have the capital that others have. So if you see in the US, you have trillions of dollars available to play. Many entrepreneurs here would be amazing over there because they just simply don't have the same access to capital. So they're not playing on a level playing field. And a lot of that is perception, where people in the US or Europe or other places have this perception of Africa, which most of it is incorrect.
Yeah.
And they add a danger premium and all these different things in investing in Africa, which just simply is based on some fables they put it into their head when the reality on the ground is very different, and you can make great returns on some of these opportunities.
Well, that's a very great point. I mean, there's a lot of debates around how the West views Africa in terms of investment. They try to apply the context on the other side of the world to businesses in Africa, which the context here does not necessarily merge there. How do you strike the balance? I mean, you've lived in the US, the UK.
You've just summed it up right. It has to be local mission, maybe a global vision, but the focus has to be even within Africa. What you can do in South Africa is very different from what you do in Nigeria. It's different from what you do in Ghana. Like, yeah. So this concept of painting it all on brush is not going to work because each country is different. The culture is different. The mentality is different. So you have to apply. You can't take a Wall Street strategy and apply it in Lagos. It's just not going to work. Or apply it in Joburg. It's not going to. You have to apply your investment, your strategy to what works in that country.
Cool. And what risks are most difficult to manage in the African context versus the global north, would you say?
That's a good question. I mean, I think there's risks in every country, of course.
Yeah.
I think here, some of them say that if an entrepreneur in the startup world, some of the challenges that you encounter, you might not over there, had to do with things beyond your remit. So you could invent in the next audio platform, and then you're on a regulatory issue from the government. It's something that you couldn't have foreseen, but they haven't created an enabling environment to allow your product or your project to flourish. And that's sort of, you can't really put that on the entrepreneur. They're just smart guy trying to write some amazing tech, and then suddenly he or she now has to start fixing regulatory issues to enable their products to get to market. And these are the kind of additional issues that sometimes you encounter on the continent that you might encounter elsewhere in the world, more developed markets.
Your talk later today, finding the next gladiators to invest in. What would be your metrics to assess that? Like, how do you approach a new investment? So checks and balances?
I tend to not be. I mean, obviously, I'll follow some. You will do analysis like anybody else. Have your research, but I tend to not just use strictly scientific metrics. I think that there's a very strong human element.
You got to meet the guys.
You have to look at them, you have to see it, and particularly on this concept, you have to know. I mean, it's good that they even use the word gladiator because you really have to be a gladiator to get that success. The people I've seen that are the most successful, and even the businesses I succeeded in, we had to have tremendous amount of resilience, You have to have the endurance to keep going. When these challenges come, can you keep going? And many people, many of the businesses you see is actually the strong, that survive, that make it, and they weren't necessarily the smartest guy in the room, but they had that endurance to survive all the challenges.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like, in fact, numerous other interviews, the guys that talk about starting the business, how they started, you just learn to fly without wings.
Yeah. You guys throw them in the pool and they just swim, some will sink, but some guys will make it to the other end through very unconventional swimming methods.
And what would you say is the right balance between scale and building sustainably for young guys starting out in Africa, especially?
Yeah, I think you want to start locally and make sure your product fits. So let's say you're here in Joburg.
Yeah.
You might have a product that fits great for Joburg, and make sure you win Joburg. Then you could now scale to Cape Town or another thing. And there you start thinking, oh, let me go to Kenya or Uganda or Nigeria. But I think you know, most of the great success stories you've seen even scale in the West. They probably did it in San Francisco, then they went to another state, then they went to another state. You know, a Facebook started in Harvard and Boston, but went to other Ivy League schools before eventually going global. You know, so they didn't from day one have this global. They were solving a problem locally and then had a global vision eventually.
And I would assume that's an ability to read market trends, for example, to say perhaps the context in South Africa is similar to this country as such, then I can then
When you
take this solution.
if often the problem you're solving here applies in the other regions.
Yeah, you just have to find those regions and then you scale.
I mean, following on from some of your comments earlier about in terms of choosing to invest here, do you find, you know, that, I don't want to use the word global investors because I mean, you are a global investor, but what I mean, the typically Western investor, do you find they're starting to understand a little better the African innovation story? They're starting to tap into it. They're starting to see, okay, there is actually a market here for us to tap to use.
I think we still have a long way to go, but it's definitely more. If I go back 10 years ago, we've got tremendous progress. 10 years ago, if I went to the US, start to my Africa, look at me, we're like blank face. And now there's more and more people who've either, maybe they've had a visit, maybe they have friends who have been there, and obviously I think the technology has given us the democratization of information. So even if it's just from their socials, they're learning much more about this dark continent than what they had before. So even if just from what they see, it could be through music or other things, their eyes have been opened that it's not quite the place they thought it was, and then they start seeing possibilities. And then of course we have a few success stories that have had internet, you know, it could be a Paystack, it could be a Money Point, a few of these ones that have had big investments from Stripe or Visa or big platforms that you realize people like to follow. So they know, oh, Mark Zuckerberg was in Andela or these other examples, then that opens floodgates for others to come in.
Is it too early, would you say, for investors to come in, especially international investors, to come in other sectors? I think when you look at the fintech sector, it's very clear what the problem is the problem of financial exclusion is very clear throughout the continent. As such, investors internationally see it as a very clear gap and they understand that problem fully. But when you start touching on problems that are a little bit nuanced, storytelling in Africa and unearthing some of the core problems that Africa faces, that entrepreneurs are trying to address in solutions that they're building on tech, investment there is not very good. You don't see much of it. Is it because the international investors don't understand the story, or is it the risk associated with that environment?
I think it's possibly a bit of both. I think definitely they don't understand the story.
Yeah.
They probably haven't, many of them wouldn't have bothered to go deeper to understand the stories. You have to actually learn more to understand. Like the fintech, like as I said, the fintech, you've already seen a lot of success and success story, which really successful. And could we see something that's going well? They all go in the same direction. For you to swim slightly against the tide and the creative in the other sectors, someone's going to have to go a bit deeper, as you said, to understand these nuances. And then just daring to see the opportunity. The opportunities are still there, but they were probably looking for the first few success stories before more capital will follow. But I think if they go a bit deeper, they will see just like Just like the fintech story is obvious.
Yeah.
The opportunity in education is obvious. The opportunity in healthcare is obvious. If you go a bit deeper, there's so many people who are not getting the same healthcare that you take for granted in the West, and so on and so forth. And many other sectors, it's just not a level playing field, and we need to create that balance.
What's holding you back? Like, what's in terms, if you're looking at, okay, you want to scale up, you want to invest a little bit further in certain regions of Africa, certain countries. What's holding you back? I mean, there's infrastructure, policy.
Well, I mean, firstly, the access to capital is just not the same.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, capital is what makes all these things go around, and the capital here, the capital allocation here is just not the same as it is in those other regions. So if you're starting with a pool that's so much smaller, obviously the net result is going to be less. But then, as you said, understanding the vagaries of the different countries and the different policies is complex. And so maybe you focus on one country, then you want to go to another, it's different. But then also, as Africa starts moving forward, it was even touched on today by, I think, Day Rock, as we start moving forward into this single market. You have AFCFTA. These institutions are critical for us because it's going to unlock so much. As you said, if we get to a place of a single currency, free movement, it's all about free movements of goods, services, and people. And when we get there, it just unlocks a much larger market for any investor, anybody. So that's like the dream point. Right. When you get there, that's going to unlock so much. But in between is these barriers of systemic ideas they've created of Africa having these issues that are not there. And once we sort of get past some of those, I think more capital flow and more investors will take more risk in looking for solutions. And also, there's no reason why as we go forward, we're not going to have more and more African startups that will start from here and become the global parent. So this sort of African solution is also something that I'm slightly push against, because I don't see why a kid from Joburg can't create something that's for the whole world.
100%.
And 100% the same way the kid in San Francisco can
Create.
That's what's coming, because the next generation coming aren't hampered with some of the baggage of my generation. They're growing up thinking it's infinite possibilities.
That was actually our next question to you, in the sense of like, it's probably the right time.
Yeah, it's a time now because they have the generation where
everything is here
with these things, so their mind is very open to infinite possibilities.
Is this not part of our problem as entrepreneurs? Should we also not be taking accountability for the lack of investment in this sense? Scientists have said this concept many a times, to say the best way or the first step in solving a problem is to clearly define it. Could it be that the investors are not paying much attention to these problems that we are solving because we are not defining them as clearly as possible? Or could it just be that it's just the risk associated with the environment and the political system that they don't want to touch it? How much of it relies really on me as the entrepreneur clearly stating what this problem is and the opportunity that lies in this problem, versus the investor looking and going, risk, I'm not touching that.
Yeah, and I think you made a very valid point. I think the more clearly you define these things, the more possible you make the investment, because at the end of the day, money likes to come and go where it feels comfortable, where it feels it can come in and it can leave as it pleases. And the more it clearly understands the opportunity, clearly defined in a language and that resonates with them, then the more possible chance of them actually going through with the investment, because they clearly get it. It's the space they understand. They've seen this before. They can see how it can grow, and they can see the possibilities, because the investor's not just investing about today, he's thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead and wants to know that those steps can happen, assuming various levels of execution by the investor. By the entrepreneur.
By the entrepreneur, 100%. So we can actually help this by clearly defining these problems.
And they're up to ourselves as well, not obviously even for ourselves. The more clearly defined you are, the more chance of success.
100%. Sure. Only if this was taught a lot in this entrepreneurship circles.
Be clear.
Very probably a long time. You can go learn that is a great idea, and eventually after years you're suddenly explaining it simply and clearer. It's taking you years just to be able to explain what you're doing simply.
There's elevator pitch, but it's so easy
to get there, especially if it's a multi-layered idea.
And a lot of entrepreneurs focus on the solution, right? This is how cool the solution is. This is what you could, right? This is what it's going to do, and
You have to get my interest.
yeah.
To even get to your solution.
Sheesh. And part of that would be clearly defining this and showing rather the scalability around this problem and other applicable cases.
Yeah, exactly. I was just giving an example. I was talking to an entrepreneur. He's actually of Nigerian origin, based in Europe. Actually. Yeah. And he was telling me a whole story about this thing he wanted to get involved in. He went on and on and on. It was a great fraud event. And then eventually at the end, I said something like, oh yeah, and the investors will get a 20x return on their investment. So I said to him, well, maybe you should start with that. Maybe if you told the person at the beginning it was going to get 20x, then they might have listened more clearly from day one. You know, as you said, they're so caught up in their thing, but they're not highlighting what the guy on the other side of the table wants to hit.
Well, speaking of Nigeria, I think Nigeria is now sitting on maybe 4, if not 5 unicorns. And I think 3 of them were in fintech, 1 was a marketplace. But when you look at the founders of those companies, 3 of them were Nigerian born, but they left very early to go and live abroad, came back and then built these unicorns. And that model seems to be quite common around Africa, where the guys that actually live here are not getting it, you know, but those that go out then come back, seems to come back with something. What is this trend?
Controversial statement from Stanley.
Leave me alone.
I think that, I have the answer, but I think definitely they get the exposure of how the game is played over there. Okay, like anything, the more you know how the game is played, the easier it is for you to play it. So I think that that's a key part of it, that they probably had exposure. Venture capital in the US, they know exactly what these guys are looking for. As you said, the more the person's comfortable with what they're looking for, the more they're likely to invest. So the guy here might have the same vision, but he might not be able to articulate it to this guy in a language and manner he's used to. This guy's having spent time in the US or Europe, because they know what the investor wants to hear. I think that's definitely a huge help for us.
They make the connections as well.
Yeah, and have the relationships and network. Maybe you went to college with a guy whose friend is here, and that opens a door for them much easier than the guy here who's 6 steps removed to the decision makers.
What would that cycle look like? And I'm just thinking out loud here. I mean, if I'm an investor, I'm interested in creating a pipeline, right? I want to create. I don't want to just catch the guys when they're ready. And with businesses that I can buy or invest in. If I'm to create a pipeline and I'm like, okay, there seems to be this model that works, that guys that leave, expats, seem to have better success in businesses than people that are building from here. If I were to create that pipeline where I fund guys to go study and try businesses abroad so they can come back and actually build solutions that are impactful, what would that cycle look like? In terms of time and resources?
I'll tell you answer slightly different, because it was me. I wouldn't necessarily start funding the guys from here, because there's already so many of them. Okay, there's already a massive diaspora, whether it's from South Africa, so that's usually the diaspora that you're looking at. And that diaspora is a key driver, in my opinion, for the future success of Africa anyway. I mean, those fintechs are a good example, but there's tons of people who in other walks of life, they've gone to college in the UK, they're in Germany, they're in Holland, and they're coming home in their droves, but what they're doing is bringing knowledge, know-how, experiences, different things, and then applying it to the continent with their family, friends, cousins, brothers, sisters. So I think diaspora is going to play a huge role in the development of Africa. And if you look at China, that's exactly what happened as well. So, but obviously they were more specific and deliberate about it. But they have they have a phrase for their own unicorns, and probably like 80% of them or something are people that, same thing, went to the US, was trained in all the best Ivy League schools, and then came back. So all these big platforms you've seen, many of them are returnees as well. Who, if you do the studies, you'll find many of them were trained in some of these Ivy League schools, then came back to China, and then created these Baidu's and Tencent's, the various giants. You check those behind it, it was a similar.
So it's a model that actually works.
Yeah, there's a whole write-up. I read up on it from how they did it in China, and that actually theirs was deliberate. Oh,
And why are African governments sleeping on
this
this?
is because they're not sleeping. We're sleeping on quite a few things. Unfortunately, we're sleeping on quite a few things, but I'll get the right subject because I had this whole study on it.
Oh, please, maybe we can leave it in the links in the description below. Yeah.
It's very specific.
Goodness
But
me.
Baidu, all these things, they were all trained in the US and came a whole. But they were intentional. The people you're talking about is just the circumstance. So he's he wears there was I'm putting my 50 out there, they're forward thinking far. So this was a plan. Even if you look in that, even if you look within Silicon Valley, all these kind of there are people at the top there, Chinese Americans, whatever, but they're all of Chinese origin. So many of these companies. So this is it's across the board.
So the government or African governments in particular can actually help investors in this. They can absorb the risk of the pipeline,
Find 100 top guys and send them, and then
bring them back, and then create.
and they come back with their experience, knowledge, and start
Right.
building companies.
And in that way, you then attract investment because then you have this quality of entrepreneurs that you've breeded.
And the investor knows, oh, I'm backing ex Harvard guy,
Right.
Stanford guy.
Somebody who has had global experience.
Feels the connectivity because hey, we both understand. So suddenly you're not that weird South African. Yeah, you're suddenly my classmates or my alma mater. We went to the same alma mater.
Sheesh.
Fascinating.
And there's no risk there, you would say, that, okay, this guy left the country or the continent for 7 years. He's out of touch.
It could be, but then obviously he's gonna have brother, mother, uncle, dad, sister here, enough to keep you in touch. So he's not totally out of touch. He has family. His family is still here.
Sheesh. And the model works. I mean, there's China.
And also because of technology now, you're just much more in touch than you
Right.
before. Every day you can be seeing what's happening.
Interesting move.
Well, Kojo, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it. That was actually quite informative.
It was.
Learned a thing or two.
Yeah.
Nice. So did I.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks for making the time.
Cheers. Thanks.